They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that he had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought, brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? And Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness. And behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake lightning, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And said and Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall each take an omer, according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent. And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as they could eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over till the morning. But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the sixth day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning." So they laid it aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat, eat it today, for today is the Sabbath the Lord. Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is the Sabbath, there will be gone. Will be none. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations." As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The people of Israel ate the manna 40 years, till they came to a habitable land. They ate the they ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is the tenth part of ephah. This is the word of God.
Great job. That was a long passage, but thank you. Yeah. Well, I want to start off by asking you guys a question. Right? Have you ever experienced a spiritual roller coaster? Have you ever experienced a spiritual roller coaster? And what do I mean by that, right? What I mean by that is in your relationship with God, it seems like a spiritual roller coaster, it seems like the only way you're going is up and up and up and up until you feel like you reach the peak or the top. But all of a sudden, your walk with Christ comes crashing down and you hit rock bottom. For me, I shared it before, right? But I experienced this, actually, not only myself, but a bunch of my friends and my whole youth ministry pretty much experienced this during my first year in high school, my first year in high school ministry. And after coming back from, I was actually counting, but Winter Retreat 2011, 10 years ago, right? The first few months back were exciting, exhilarating, and our church was thriving, right? Our youth ministry was growing. We had more numbers, more. I think we had like over 150 members at that time, just in our high school, and our youth was riding a momentum and climbing that roller coaster. But like I mentioned before, soon enough it all came crashing down. In today's message, the reason I'm sharing this story and I'm telling you guys this is because what happened then is really just a parallel to the story that we just read in Exodus 16. And throughout this message, I'm going to tell you guys the rest of this story. And you'll see really the connections of how the story of Exodus is actually very close to our own story, right? The Israelites had just escaped from Egypt and they crossed the line to the other side of the Red Sea, right? This is what we learned last week. And they have been thrilled and seemingly very ready for a promised land. They're singing songs and hymns in chapter 15 of how the Lord had delivered them from the enemy and he had triumphant gloriously when they get to the wilderness. And after um, finding no water, right, this is what happened right before what we just read, they begin to grumble, right? They begin to murmur, right? They begin to complain to Moses because all the water around had become bitter. And we're told Moses cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. And from that log, it came, right? What happened was the bitter water was able to turn sweet so that the Israelites can drink it. And in verse 25 to 26 of chapter 15, and we actually see it in chapter 15 and 16, we get a prelude of what's happening. It says, there the Lord made for them a statue and a rule. There he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep his word, I will put none of this disease on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Right? And the key words here for our message today is really that the Lord tested, and the follow-up words of listen, do, and keep, which we could really sum it up as the keyword trust, right? So tested and trust, tested and trust. These are the key words today that define our message. And the main idea I really want to get across to us today is this, are we trusting God in the testing times? Do we trust God in our testing times? And we're going to ask and answer 3 questions that's really going to help us understand what it means to trust God in our testing times. And our first question is this: what is God testing us on, right? Or what is God testing us? Right? What is God testing us on? And the answer is whether we could trust him in our wilderness journey. Whether we could trust him in our wilderness journey. See, we just read the congregation of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, right, between Elim and Sinai, right, during the 15th day of the 2nd month, which means it's been 45 days, right, since they departed Egypt. The people of Israel were grumbling again, right? We saw kind of a little bit of that from last week, right? They're grumbling against Moses, Aaron, right? And we're going to see this trend, this very repetitive trend that kind of is going to continue to appear in Exodus. The Israelites complaining and grumbling, even though they left Egypt. And look at what they said. Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. After 45 days of traveling in the desert, they're upset. They're complaining, right? But pretty much in layman terms, they're saying, we should have just died in Egypt. At least we're eating well there. Look at us now. Why'd you bring us to wilderness just to starve and die? Right? And that's what they're saying. And my thoughts when I read this is like this. Wow, first of all, right, how ungrateful, right? How ungrateful. The Israelites, think about their lives before. They're crying, they're desperate, they're calling out to the Lord all this time for how many years? Like hundreds and hundreds of years. And he's finally saved you. Yet, so easily, the Israelites, they forgot about everything that the Lord had done for them. That the Lord did for them. See, it's only after 45 days, yet the Israelites have already forgotten the faithfulness and the grace of the Lord. And think about it. They've witnessed, they saw with their plain eyes, they saw plagues upon plagues, right, in Egypt. They witnessed the pardoning from the Passover lamb. See, they saw the splitting. They literally saw the splitting of the Red Sea, right? And they crossed the line. They crossed to the other side. They've come out of Egypt. Yeah, they have. But Egypt has not come out of them. And they've come out of Egypt, but Egypt has not yet come out of them. And this gives us insight on the symbolism of the progression of salvation, right? This is a historical book. This is one of the historical books, Exodus. But we got to see it as what it means to us today. And remember, although Exodus is a bigger story of the redemptive narrative, it also symbolizes the story of salvation for us believers today. The Israelites who were once under, right, and these are kind of more Christianese terms, but it's kind of good to know. They're once under the law of sin and death. Right now, they are under the law of grace. And they've experienced atonement, they've been justified. And again, I'm not saying literally everybody here in the wilderness are under the law of grace and in a relationship with God, but collectively, like what I mean is like as one people, right? As one group, Israel has symbolically, um, they've entered the next stage, right? And in many ways, even though they've entered the next stage, right, the symbolism for Israel is actually a good image of our church today. It's like of how our church is like today. Think about it. Not everybody who goes and participates at church are automatically Christians. Right? I want you guys to understand that. Right? But true Christians or true believers are those who place their faith in Jesus Christ. And here, God is testing the Israelites whether they could trust Him or not. Right? Can they trust Him or not? Like 10 years ago, at that retreat site, then last night, people were singing songs. They were dancing. They were jumping up and down, right? The room was shaking, sweat dripping, right? Coming down the retreat site. People were happy. They were tired. The night before, a lot of emotions and feelings have been shared. In retrospect, although it seemed good at the time, right, it wasn't because we shared all these emotions and feelings that we were able to cross to the other side. Right? It wasn't that. For the Israelite, sure, together as a collective, they might have gone to the other side. But there were those still within their hearts who had not crossed yet. I mean, right, there are many things that might have been happening, right? Israelites, some of them may have physically crossed over, but their hearts may still not trust God completely. Or it could mean the Israelites may have crossed over in and out, but because their faith is still very young, they may be just struggling in the wilderness. Either way, right, this is a very real picture of our church today, right? We see it all the time. There's combination of people of faith, right, in various stages, right? We see various people in various stages of their faith and their relationship with God, and whether it's Agape Church or any other church, right? We see this all over. People are in different stages, even though they're in a group. And before I scare you guys too much, right, I'm going to be honest, right? Yes, right? This is a real part of Christianity. Not everybody that you meet and interact with church are going to be believers automatically, right? But remember, the good news is God has called us into a relationship with Him, not through our works, but by grace, through faith alone. So far, if you guys have been listening, and I hope, for those, I haven't scared people too much. Don't be counting how many times have I failed this week. Like, oh man, did I make my quota? No, it's not about that, right? Don't get so wrapped on your sins. Right? We're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, like Romans 3:23 says. But what I'm trying to get to us today is this: be conscious. Right? Be aware of your situation, right? Be honest with yourself in order that we could trust Him and walk in faith. For the Israelites here, after their big spiritual roller coaster with God, right, the Lord was testing them in the wilderness. Right? He was like, hey, were you just there for the ride, or are you serious? And look at what happened. They grumbled. They were complaining. And the question is, are we just like the Israelites today? Do we so easily forget and betray God? Or maybe, even worse, we've been blindsided to even recognize that He's done anything in our lives in the first place. Whatever it is, God is testing us today as well. In various seasons of our lives, in actually every moment of our lives, He's testing us whether we could trust Him or not. And in your own wilderness, do you have the faith to see that He's leading you? He's personally guiding you and navigating you through these tough times. The second question we're going to ask is, how does God help us through our testing times? How does God help us through our testing times? And the answer is, He provides us with what we need and gives us rest when we need it. He provides us of what we need and gives us the rest when we need it. Next, we see that the Lord provided bread called manna, right? Manna from heaven. And the people of Israel were specifically called to go out every day, right? They're called to go out every day again. And the purpose was so that God will test them, right? He's testing them whether they would walk in His law or not, right? Whether they'll trust Him in it or not. And on the sixth day, the Israelites were called to get double portion needed, right? Both evening and morning, they would go out, as a reminder, right, that it was the Lord who brought them out of Egypt, and to see the glory of the Lord, because He had heard their grumbling against Him. On one hand, it wasn't just that the Lord was providing Israel food, but God was giving Israel a reminder, right? He was giving them a reminder as well. He's not just giving them food, but a reminder. Look, God is working. God is providing you with what you need, with your everyday essentials, right? He's giving you your needs. God is giving Israel another reason to place their faith in Him. We got to understand something about God. He doesn't just test us. So far, if you've been listening, maybe that's what you've gotten, but it's not that He's just testing us. His purpose isn't to make our lives terrible. He isn't this big bully. No. In one way, God was testing the Israelites' faith, but in another, He was giving them a sign to believe. Not just one sign, but many signs. Look around. Signs, the pillar of the cloud, the angel of the Lord, manna, quail, right? Splitting of the Red Sea. It's all over. Plagues and plagues, God's presence, right? Speaking through Moses. Like, wait a second, how is Moses and Aaron even saying these things in the first place, right? For us today, we might be asking, how come we don't have signs? Well, let me tell you one thing. Even though God gave Israel signs, you gotta see, signs are for the weaker of faith. Signs are for those that are still very young in their faith. They're like training wheels for a new believer. I mean, not all the time, but I'm trying to say mostly, right? Even Jesus said in John 4:48, right? He said, unless you have signs and wonders, you will not believe, right? In other words, do you really need these signs to believe? Do you really just need to see with your eyes? And also, guys, it's not that we don't even have signs. We have signs every day, right? God directs us. He guides us. He answers our prayers. Also, we have the New Testament. And just historically speaking, I know you guys don't really have maybe not really thought of this, but historically thinking, the New Testament is like, it's proven history. Even like scholars and historians, they all see the New Testament, and it's not that nobody that's really studied the Bible and history says this has never happened, right? God has given us real signs, right? Look, and not only that, but look, you gotta see, even though He's given us signs, these signs to the Israelites, they didn't even work, right? They didn't even work in the first place. And if we had maybe a bigger sign or not, honestly, we'd probably be the same. More than a sign, God has called people to believe in faith. He wants us to believe rather without even seeing. He wants us to believe in faith, not through signs. Yet, God still gave it to Israel because they're grumbling. He gave everything that they needed. He's helping them. Don't you see? He's providing for them. He's giving them what they need through the test, right? A side note, look at what the Israelites were grumbling to Moses and Aaron about, right? It was noted that their grumbling wasn't against them, but against the Lord. Many times, us in the church, we grumble against our leaders, right? We grumble against those that are, quote unquote, superior or above, right? Quote unquote. And yes, I've done it before, right? When I was younger, I've been the same, right? We've all done it. You don't get along with a leader in your missions team, or I don't know, your retreat group leader or your Bible study teacher. Maybe you don't get along with them. And God forbid, right? You don't get along with your pastor. I mean, oh, that's not. I know that's not a thing, but right. Either way, right? We've all grumbled and we've all struggled, right? Yet this grumbling is not against our leaders. It's against God. That's what it said here, right? At the end of the day, Moses and Aaron, they're just representatives for what God is doing, right? When the disciples were being rejected in their hometown sharing the gospel, Jesus said, wipe your feet, wipe the dust off your feet. It's not me who, I mean, it's not you guys, right? You disciples who they're rejecting. They're rejecting me. So that's just a good side note to remember. We gotta all be humble and respect and submit. Not even the leaders must do that ourselves, right? We gotta love and be one church in unity, right? So, despite Israel's grumbling, right, God, He also gave them a glory cloud, right? This cloud of glory, of God's glory, to supply their needs. He gave them quail, which is meat. Think about it, it's expensive, right? It's expensive. Like back then, meat doesn't come so easily, right? There's not some prime USDA, right? You don't get it so easily. And He gave them manna that's described like a wafer made of honey. I mean, today we have wafers with honey, and we're kind of spoiled, right? We have all these good bakeries like Tulegerie or Paris Baguette or I don't know, but back then, like a wafer, that's something very like that. It's sweet. It has flavor, right? It's not easy to just make in the desert, but God gave it to them. He gave it to them so that they could gather as many in an omer, which is 2 quarts or 2 liters. It's enough. Do you see? It's enough, right? He didn't give them a big gallon, but He gave them just enough for every day. And not only that, but when it came to the 6th day, He tells them to gather double portion because He's starting to do something. So God is actually starting to do something very interesting here. He's starting to institute the holy day of the Sabbath. Think about it. 10 Commandments, they're not given yet. But this goes back to the last day of creation when God rested. God rested that day so His people could also rest. Right? You think God really needs to rest at the end of the day? No, He's all powerful, He's all great, but He chose to rest so that we could follow in His example. God wasn't being cruel, guys. Testings, these times of testing, they're not so that God's not being a bully. He's not trying to be cruel, but He was being compassionate to Israel. Think about gathering food every day. You got to capture the quail, right? They're not made like all well done. It's not roasted quail, right? But it was literal like birds, right? They got to go collect them. They got to get the manna. Right? It takes work, right? I mean, it doesn't say here, but who knew? Maybe the birds even went to get the manna. Who knows, right? They got to spend time to cook. And while Israel is still on this journey, God doesn't ever want anyone to burn out. See, following God was never intended to cause burnout. But God gave, and He gives us rest even today as we walk with Christ. He's given us the Sabbath as well for you and I. All right? For you and I. One part I kind of feel bad about you students today is that we're in a generation that's actually more active and more competitive and more like fast-paced than ever before. And sure, it brings a lot of excellence and there's a lot of good things being produced. But, there are times that we may be going way too fast for our own good. Right? God gave Israelites bread, meat, everyday essentials, His presence, and even signs so that Israel could pass through the testing in the wilderness. Today, as we're being tested in our wilderness, in our journey, God has given us our daily bread, and He's given us our everyday essentials, right? So that we may follow Him, so that we don't burn out, so that we could follow Him well. Not only that, but He's given us something much more awesome than just a pillar. He's given us the Holy Spirit, right? The presence of God is not just next to us, but is within us today. And He's given us His direct words through the Holy Bible so that we could live by and follow. and He answers our prayers and walks with us in our times of testing. The last question we're going to answer, right, is this: why can we get through the test? Why? Why can we get through the test? And the answer is because we have a champion who endured and passed in our place. We have a champion who endured and passed in our place. See, when God gave Israel specific directions on gathering food, how did Israel respond? What does it say in verse 19? Moses said, "Let no one leave any of it till the next morning." And verse 20 says, "But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till morning, and it bred worms and stank. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as they could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted." Even after hearing God's instructions, Israel failed to obey. They failed to listen. Even when the food came from the glory cloud, right? The people of the wilderness, they lacked faith. So they saved their food. They wanted to preserve it. They wanted to save whatever they can because they were scared. They were scared that the next day the Lord wouldn't provide. And the thing is, that's just like us, right? After God, He shows us His grace. He provides for us in our lives. A few moments later, when we don't see it, the provision in front of us, what do? We forget. We choose something else. We try to trust in something else. Right? We try to trust in our own knowledge and experience. We're like, next time if it's not here, we gotta protect. We gotta preserve. We gotta make sure, right, it's not gonna be gone. And not only that, but look at verse 27. It says, "On the seventh day, some of the people went out together, but none," right? They found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my law?" Look, it wasn't just the Israelites that failed to trust God by saving their food till the next morning. But on the seventh day, right, they tried to take things into their own hands, right? Instead of keeping the Sabbath holy, instead of resting, right? Well, look, they've been traveling this whole time. They need to rest. They need to sleep, right? Some tried to take advantage of God's grace. They didn't rest. They went out to the wilderness searching for food, thinking maybe I could get ahead, looking for their own way to feel safe and comfortable. But when they arrived, nothing was there. In other words, Israel did not trust in God. They failed. They thought, maybe if I could get ahead, maybe they could save themselves from their hunger, right? But instead, they wasted their efforts, their strength, and their time going out to find nothing. For the Israelites, it was food. For us, what are we doing to try to take things into our own hands? What do we do instead of resting in the presence of God? What do we do instead of trusting His words? Right? Look, do you think the Israelites passed the test? Does this look like somebody passed the test? It does not even look like a C. Let's be honest, right? No way, in no universe, the Israelites did not pass the test, right? No universe, they did not pass the test, right? They failed. They didn't trust God. They didn't listen to Him. In fact, even worse, after all these signs, even the grumbling and think about it, like all the complaining, God gave them extra, right? He gave them extra credit. And look what happened. They rejected Him. And they tried to do things their own way. For us today, we're the same as these Israelites. We don't listen to His words. How many times have we chosen to do things our own way, to follow our own way of thinking, right? We don't like to obey His commandments, right? We don't trust His provision. Instead, we get anxious and we get afraid, and we think, man, I just gotta do it as long as I figure this thing out by myself, right? We put God in the back of our minds. Actually, we more likely than that, when things don't work out, we get angry and we start to complain to God, right? We like to do things our own way. We're stubborn and stiff-necked, just like these prideful Israelites. I mean, we all know the words of God. But why is our faith so shaky today, right? I mean, look at this past week. I'm sure every one of us, in some way, has failed, has chosen sin, at least once, and we're, if not multiple times this past week. Yet, guys, why can we pass this test? Because we have a champion. We have a champion who went through, who endured, and who passed the test in our place. Guys, what was our call to worship this morning? Hebrews 4:14-16. Let me read it again. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace in time of need. I mean, look here. None of us deserve to pass. It's not just the Israelites. None of us. None of us deserve to get to the other side in the first place. And none of us within our hearts have fully passed, right? As well. We all have a little bit of Egypt within us. Sure, right? We all have a little bit of Egypt within us. And yet, we have somebody in our place who has gone through, endured, he experienced, he gets it. He's been in the wilderness, yet he's passed the test. That someone, right, is our Savior and our champion, Jesus Christ. And it's because he endured and passed. It's because Jesus was victorious. He won. He won in the wilderness. Right, in both the desert where he was tempted, you remember he was tempted by Satan, and on that hill, the second desert, where he suffered, where he experienced the shame and the guilt. It was that moment on the cross where Jesus experienced all the complaining and grumbling of the people. And this time, the people weren't just angry. They killed him. They murdered him. We murdered him. That's our champion, guys. That's our Jesus. He did it not just so he can do it. He didn't have to go through this test. He was already on the other side. But he did it because he loves us. He wants us to pass. He wants us to pass through with him. He went through from one side to another, and he's gotten us and he's taking us home. Guys, don't you guys see? The test is not whether we get out by ourselves or not, right? Maybe for the first time in our lives, right, this is a test that we're not supposed to take on our own. This is a test that we're not supposed to take on our own. This test, it's a group test. It's with one another, and most importantly, it's with Jesus Christ, the leader of our team. Why could we pass this test? Because even though we failed, Jesus Christ has passed in our place. Now, he's already won and taken care of the ultimate test in our lives, right? The real, like the big Egypt, we've already gotten out of it. For those who believe, we are already out. But each and every one of us, we're still being tested in these mini Egypts within our hearts today. Yes, Jesus will help us, right? He's going to help us through those moments as well. But now I'm going to share with us 3 applications that's going to help us be victorious through these tests. And the first one is this. First application. Remember and be conscious of the Lord's work in your life. Remember, and you got to be conscious of the Lord's work in your life. Look at the way the Israelites responded. They were so easy to forget, right? They were blindsided, right? They didn't see the big picture of how God is working through their lives. Even after God did all these miraculous works upon works, they failed to trust in the Lord's plan. I mean, reading it is a little embarrassing and sad, but to be honest, guys, it's very relatable. It's very, very relatable. Because for you and me, we're the same. And after we come back from a retreat or a praise night or whatever spiritual roller coaster experience, right? We lose sight of the Lord's work in our lives so fast. we come crashing down. But our relationship with God is not supposed to be like a roller coaster. Actually, at young faith, right, it might seem that way. And even in our maturity, there might be moments we feel like it's a roller coaster. But in reality, right, it's not a roller coaster ride, but it's a Ferris wheel. Where inside we are with our beloved person, Jesus, is rotating slowly. And in that 5 p.m. early evening glow outside the whole amusement park, we get to see and observe all of the wonderful works and creations of the Lord and what He has done and what He is doing in our lives. You gotta remember, and you gotta be conscious, like awake to see this, to see the Lord's work in your life. Second thing is this. Second application: trust in the Lord's provision and guidance. Right? Just like the Israelites, God provided every single thing that they needed. Right? He never did anything. He never gave them anything that they could not handle. And for us today, He will never give us anything that we cannot handle. And this is going to be kind of crazy for some of us, but in Deuteronomy chapter 1, we are told the journey out of the wilderness. Do you know how long it was supposed to take? It was supposed to take not 40 years like what we read, but it's supposed to take 11 days. Actually, that trip's supposed to take 11 days. It's recorded in Deuteronomy and even today. But the Israelites, they're stuck and they got lost for 40 years. It's no surprise that such a stiff-necked and stubborn generation of people took that long. And it's because they didn't trust. They didn't trust the Lord's guidance. And we're going to see through this wilderness narrative that we're going to adventure through for the next few weeks what really happened. But for us today, maybe we've been in our wilderness, or maybe we're entering one, or maybe there's one ahead of us in our future. You can choose to stay stubborn and bitter and do things your own way. Or you could trust in the Lord's provision and guidance. Guys, Jesus loves you. He wants you out. He doesn't want you to be stuck there for 40 years. It's 11 days and out. Would you trust Him? And lastly, find rest in your champion. Find rest in your champion. The thing about long journeys, right? The thing about these long journeys are you need a rest. Right? God gave the Israelites a sneak peek of the law of Sabbath because it's something that they needed. For us today, like I said, we're living in a very rapid and fast-moving generation. Our world is going 100 miles per hour. Information being spread, news being shared, internet popping, right? Social media updating. And although that in itself is not always a bad thing, we forget to take a step back and breathe and rest. Otherwise, we're going to burn out. And not just any type of rest, right? I'm not just talking about eating good food and, like watching your TV shows. That's not all bad, but it can't just be that, right? It can't just end with that. We got to rest in our champion. Let Him fight the fight for you. Don't try to do things on your own. Do your studies in the Lord. Make your friendships in the Lord. Spend time in your hobbies in the Lord. Eat good food in the Lord. Watch Korean dramas in the Lord. Right? That's how you don't burn out. Right? It's not that you try to fit Jesus somewhere into your schedule. No, He's in the center of everything. Right? Find rest in your champion. 10 years ago that day, it may have looked and felt like we've all crossed over. But the reality was, you guys know, that through a little bit of testing, it weeded out those who truly believed and didn't. And it's not so that we just, right, like the purpose is not that it's not so that we don't just separate people, right? We're not trying to segregate the Christians and non-Christians. That's not the point. But I'm going to share 2 reasons why we're trying to see whether we've crossed the line or not. Number one, if you haven't crossed over, it's better to be honest with yourself. Right? It's better to be honest so that you could cross over. And second, it's so that we don't get lost in the wilderness for 40 years on this 11-day journey. There were those who came down from their retreat site that day, who not only on the outside, but on the inside had really left everything at the altar. They had left the bigger Egypt back on the mountain. And sure, they experienced and endured through the wilderness and the many Egypts in their hearts. But afterward, there were those who passed because they placed their trust and faith in Jesus Christ. I hope we could be like those today. Let's pray.